They say if you have two quarterbacks, you don't have one. Well, what if you have four? Welcome in, everybody, to the reveal of the 30th team in my power rankings heading into the 2025 NFL season. As today, we take a deep dive into the Cleveland Browns, a team transitioning away from the Deshaun Watson era that was regrettable and short-lived, but this is an interesting season for the Browns. A young team, again, in a bit of a transition season while they hope to compete for their coach, who is definitely trying to save his job this season, and compete in the quarterback room with a four-pronged position battle in the QB room, something unlike anything I've ever seen before. So certainly a lot to talk about, not just that, plenty more to get into here today. Very much looking forward to today's deep dive. As we get into it, if you could take just a second to hit that like button down below. You guys have been awesome so far hitting the likes on these first couple episodes. They are performing great, and you hitting that like button goes a long way towards that. So it takes just a second. It really helps out. Thank you for doing that in advance. And of course, if you enjoy this video and the series, make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss any of our 32 deep dives over the course of this off season. But without further ado, let's get started, as always, taking a look at the team's offseason, where they got better, where they got worse at each position group, including the coaching room, if you will. And in the case of the Browns, they are making one significant change. While they do retain Kevin Stefanski, the sort of offensive overseer, if you will, they do make a change with the de facto offensive coordinator, saying goodbye to Ken Dorsey after a disastrous season, and promoting the young Tommy Rees, former Notre Dame quarterback. Excited to see what he can do in this promoted role here. But then as we look at the quarterback room, not only are we going to have a four-way position battle to talk about here, but I don't ever remember a team just wiping the board clean with four quarterbacks that got starts for them in the previous season and moving into the next year with four more brand new quarterbacks on the roster. They are just asking for that legendary Browns jersey with the 40 names of different quarterbacks that have started for them or whatever it might be. They are just asking for that jersey to become more and more of a meme with this process. Not to say it can't work, but boy, this is pretty crazy. So Jameis, Deshaun, Dorian Thompson-Robinson traded for Kenny Pickett, and then Bailey Zappi, who actually started a game for them last year, all out the door. And then in Kenny Pickett, Joe Flacco is back from that 2023 season. Spent a year with the Colts last year. And then the two rookie quarterbacks, obviously a lot went down on draft weekend. They get Dylan Gabriel first in the third round, and then Shedeur Sanders, who so many people thought they might end up with anyway at some point in the draft. So definitely looking forward to the full roster breakdown to talk about how I think this plays out, how I think whoever ends up starting ends up playing for them. But they are definitely looking at this and saying this is hopefully upgraded. If it is, it might be slightly upgraded, but it was a disaster situation. Outside of maybe a game and a half of good Jameis Winston, this was a rotation of benchable bad quarterback play. They're taking another swing at this thing to get something beyond that. We'll leave it at that for now and talk about the rest of this roster. At running back, definitely upgraded in my opinion. You know, Nick Chubb, even if he was his old self, only played 17% of snaps for them last year, but he was not his old self. He's still out there to be signed by anybody for a reason. And then Deontay Foreman as well, no longer with the team, but they spend that high second round pick on Quinshon Judkins, keeping him in the state of Ohio, out of Ohio State there. And then they grabbed Dylan Sampson in the fourth round as well. So they seriously think this is going to be upgraded, and I tend to agree. At tight end, I will say slightly upgraded. I love Harold Fannin, and I'm excited to talk about him. Jordan Akins did some decent stuff for this team in 12 personnel last year, so I don't want to just trash what Akins did. But Harold Fannin, I think, at least in his rookie season, should be even a slight upgrade over that. And then long-term, you're hoping this is a very nice addition. At wide receiver, I said neutral on this. They had Amari Cooper for the first 5 games of last season or so, traded him to Buffalo. Cooper was horrible when he did play for the Browns last year, arguably the worst wide receiver in football in the first month of the season. And then Elijah Moore as well, out the door. He just couldn't really take a next step with this team, just as he couldn't with the Jets. But they do bring in Deontay Johnson and DeAndre Carter. So pretty unconsequential with that wide receiver room, though you could argue maybe they should have done more, and that's a bit disappointing. But at least on paper, I don't think they downgraded there. And then at offensive line, it's really just shifting of depth pieces, but the Browns do now have 2 of the best depth pieces in the entire league as they bring in Tevin Jenkins and Cornelius Lucas in free agency on the cheap. And then a variety of different guys that were playing, Jermaine Ifedi, journeyman veteran. Jedrick Wills, former first-round pick, had kind of fallen out of grace with this team, certainly. He's taking a year off to recover now. And then James Hudson, their developmental tackle, who always struggled for them as well. So those guys are all gone. But even if you're not penciling in Jenkins or Lucas to start, having those depth pieces for an older offensive line should prevent some of these sloppiness, bringing in poor backups that we have seen with this Cleveland offensive line over the last couple of years. So I like those moves quite a bit. But then as you go over to the defensive side of things with the interior defensive line, I do say upgraded. They lose Dalvin Tomlinson, so that's certainly not nothing. But I would say getting Mason Graham with the 5th overall pick, and they gave Malik Collins 2 years, $20 million. That is an upgrade for me. Not just 2 players instead of 1, but they have high hopes, obviously, for Mason Graham. Maurice Hurst is not back with this team. And then Quentin Jefferson, the perennial penetrating 4-eye pass rushing specialist, played 13% of this team's snaps. He is not on the roster right now. And then at edge, they did trade away Zadarius Smith mid-season, so you count the 30% of snaps he played for them last year as a loss. And they signed Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, the underachieving former first-round pick of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm going to say neutral at that one. I think a full season of Joe Tryon is about a push with 6 games of Zadarius Smith, if not a slight downgrade, but that'd be nitpicky at the end of the day. And then at linebacker, I am going to say downgraded. Unfortunately, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, who played about half of their snaps last season before injury, is going to be unavailable for them at least this season and likely beyond at this point. So they are looking to kind of transition in that linebacker room, and they bring in Carson Schlesinger very early in the second round, the very first pick, right in the second round. I like Carson Schlesinger. I'm excited to break him down here, but it's tough for any young linebacker to come in and just fill the shoes of Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. So certainly downgraded, at least for now. Cornerback room, they definitely feel pretty good about this group kind of turning it around this year because they just kind of left this group as is. No draft picks there. No Greg Newsome trade that was on the table potentially. So really no losses at the cornerback room. And then they did bring in some slot corner depth in Nick Needham, who feels like he's played 1 million snaps for the Miami Dolphins over the last half decade. Then at safety, feels like this has been a bit of a revolving door in this safety room. That is more of the same this offseason, though they're hoping that their starters are at least locked in from what they had last year. But Juan Thornhill, who played about a third of their snaps last year on and off the field, and Rodney McLeod, who ended up having to play 50% of their snaps as Thornhill was getting banged up. Both of those guys are gone, and then they bring in some veteran depth in Rayshon Jenkins and DeMonte Casey. Had Thornhill been healthy all of last season, I would say slightly downgraded, but he wasn't. So just going to leave that one as neutral. And then to the chagrin, I think, of Browns fans, the special teams is staying neutral. Dustin Hopkins was unbearably bad last year. And at least as we sit here today, he's slated to be their starting kicker again. They did bring in something called Andre Smits to maybe compete there. I don't know what to expect there. But wouldn't be surprised if we see a kicker addition closer to the start of the season. But there is your Browns offseason. Another shout out to Andrew Berry. I do think he does a great job trying to add talent to this Browns team. Obviously, the Deshaun Watson trade happened. hard to separate that from ownership, of course. But beyond that, I do think Andrew Berry knows what he's doing here. And this is an offseason that made a lot of sense to me. Certainly a youth movement here in Cleveland. And I cannot wait to talk about a lot of these young guys that are going to now have good runway to playing time for this 2025 Browns team. But before we do go through the whole roster, I want to break down the coaching staff as well as what this team's going to look like schematically speaking on both sides of the ball. And that starts at the top with Kevin Stefanski, who, as I said in the intro, definitely heads into this season on the hot seat. Despite winning 2 Coach of the Year awards in the last 5 years, I said it in last year's deep dive, though, to me, that is much more emblematic of a flawed award and voting process for that award than it is saying Kevin Stefanski is this bona fide top 10 head coach. And Browns fans were upset with me over that, even though I was way too high on the Browns as a team last year, but that certainly has kind of aged well. Stefanski heads into this season ranked pretty close to where I had him last year, in the kind of high 20s. I've got him right now as the 24th head coach in the league. And I just think he has everything to prove here. And I think he has lost the grace of those Coach of the Year awards. And this ownership is going to start to get impatient with him if there is not progress here. Now, I don't think the Browns necessarily need to win a million games. That would certainly help. To me, it's much more about establishing consistency that has felt, frankly, more lacking with this Browns team than maybe any offense in the league. And some of that, to be fair to Stefanski, has been out of his control. This entire Deshaun Watson situation has made things a mess for the head coach here. They bring him in, they work with him as the starter, then he gets suspended for 2/3 of their first season with him. That alone is going to screw up the consistency aspect of designing your offense, of course. And then you head into the next year. The decision to acquire him was a complete disaster. He's a total piece of shit. The effort was not there. He couldn't stay healthy on top of that. So he continued to be on and off the field. And when he was on the field, it felt like he didn't know the damn playbook at times. Just passing up open reads, holding onto the ball forever, just electing to get into, backyard football scramble drill constantly. It's just been an unmitigated disaster. And now you look forward to 2025, very much look forward, maybe not to the caliber of players in that quarterback room, but at least knowing you got an open competition. May the best man win, and may the best man for Kevin Stefanski's system win, to at least start to build performances on top of each other instead of just looking back and saying, well, we had a couple of nice one-off games. What was it, week 9 against the Ravens last year or whatever, when Jameis first stepped in, or some random Linsanity style run from Joe Flacco in 2023 that came to a screeching 4 interception halt in the playoffs that season. Just, even if the offense isn't explosive or dynamic, have an identity and be consistent. That's a core aspect of something I think we need to see from Kevin Stefanski. And then if that can happen, I think maybe the most important thing for Kevin Stefanski, we just looked at that list of offseason changes. They have been churning through veterans, and, you look at their kind of snap counts and players played, it feels like it's a different team every single week. And part of that is just bad injury luck, but part of it too is they just haven't been able to develop young players. Seemingly everybody under the age of 26 that the Browns have brought in, it feels like they've failed under Kevin Stefanski. It's probably not that simple, but it's probably closer to true than being an exaggeration. And you look at this now young roster with a lot of young draft picks and a lot more runway for the existing young players to get on the field. For me, the most important thing for Kevin Stefanski this year is Quinshon Judkins, this quarterback room, Cedric Tillman, Harold Fannin Jr., these young guys, can they get an actual core player, especially on the offensive side of the ball, that they can actually start to build around and have some hope heading into 2026? All of that has been missing with Kevin Stefanski. Again, not all his fault, but he also hasn't totally overcome a nightmare situation either. So as I mentioned, he is, for me, the 24th ranked head coach heading into the year. I still like Kevin Stefanski, and I'm pulling for him. It's just he hasn't given us too much reason to believe in him as of late. But I do still give him some credit for his offensive acumen. These rankings have fallen slightly kind of year by year here. But if I rank him as the 24th head coach, you look at the pass game coach rankings and the run game rankings, they are higher than 24th. So 14th to 21st for pass game design and 13th to 16th for run game coaching. A B grade in run game, a B- grade in pass game coaching. So still respectable rankings for the scheming side of things for Stefanski. Still want to see a little bit more there. And once upon a time, he would have been more top 10 in those categories. But certainly a decent respect for his mind as an offensive, the offensive coordinating side of his job. But where he really gets dragged down to that 24th ranking and where the Browns have really faltered is that coach and culture grade. And this transcends Kevin Stefanski. The Browns obviously have basically failed as an organization since the NFL merger, but they do get an F grade for coach and culture, tied with one other team at the very bottom. And this was something I learned from last year, being too high on teams like the Browns and the Jets, putting a little bit more weight into that coach and culture grade, or at least separating the teams that have really historically struggled. And Kevin Stefanski has not been able to repair the broken culture in Cleveland. And that's obviously at the end of the day, the biggest thing he needs to do to save his job here. Now, to talk about what his scheme looks like a little bit more, though, he is the first offensive coach in this series that does very much coach a Shanahan-style offense. And there certainly will be more Shanahan-McVay disciples to come as we go through this series. But ironically, Kevin Stefanski never actually coached with Kyle Shanahan. He was in Minnesota forever under a bunch of different kind of more traditional pro-style offenses. I would say certainly Brad Childress, Bill Musgrave, Norv Turner, even Pat Shurmur. But it was really the 1 year under Gary Kubiak in 2019 where something really seemed to click for Kevin Stefanski, and he really kind of embraced the entire Shanahan-style offense. Of course, Kubiak is kind of the uncle of the Shanahan tree, having been a part of that Mike Shanahan offense in Denver with Elway and their Super Bowl and all of that. But it was that year where the Vikings really leaned into the wide zone run game and the play action game and all of these widely discussed Shanahan scheme principles. And that was the year Kevin Stefanski finally kind of got the respect he probably had deserved for a while as an assistant coach in Minnesota, surviving through all of these different coaching changes. And he gets the job in Cleveland. And from the get-go, it was very clear that Kevin Stefanski's offense is going to be a Shanahan-inspired offense. A lot of heavy personnel, 12 tight end packages, especially early in his Browns days, a heavy dose of wide zone run game and play action and all of that good stuff that comes in that Shanahan tree. But really a big part of kind of why Kevin Stefanski's run game coaching grade is still pretty high there with that B grade. And a part of why I still want to believe in Kevin Stefanski is I actually think Stefanski inspired Kyle Shanahan in many ways. Those Browns run games in 2021, 2022 with great guard play, Wyatt Teller and Joel Bitonio, that was kind of the first Shanahan style offense that frankly ran just as much gap and trap and counter as they did wide zone. And really in like 2022 into 2023, the Niners run game evolved, right? They started pulling their guards more and having a much more diverse run game, valuing counter runs in the way that had worked so well for Kevin Stefanski's offense. And then that builds into Sean McVay kind of evolving his run game into more of a duo-oriented run game, kind of all within the same concepts and coaching playbook arc, if you will, but changing the way that the run game is really called. And honestly, Kevin Stefanski was at the forefront of all of that. And I think with all of these different coaching influences, he was able to kind of pick and choose some other aspects of the run game that aren't just, smashing wide zone at you 15, 20 times a game. But unfortunately, in recent years, the offensive line hasn't been as good. Nick Chubb has been injured, and the glory days of this Browns run game, we're searching for it, to say the least. But at the end of the day, I do still very much expect Stefanski to stick with what historically has worked with him. A lot of 12 personnel and play action being the kind of root of the offense. I think the Harold Fannin draft pick is a testament to that and what they're going to do with really diverse, difficult to defend 12 personnel. And hopefully, a more healthy, better offensive line, and the addition of Quinshon Judkins as well is a huge teaser to the fact that the Browns are not changing who they want to be under Kevin Stefanski, and they want to be that heavy personnel, run-first oriented offense. So from a personnel standpoint, Stefanski is very much going to get that opportunity to prove that he can do what he wants to do here in Cleveland and establish that as the identity of this Browns offense. And then enter Tommy Rees as well. Former Notre Dame quarterback, just 33 years old, but he gets promoted to the sort of de facto offensive coordinator. I fully expect Stefanski will retain play calling duties and all that stuff, at least until he can get things under control here. But Rees is fascinating. He's been kind of climbing up the coaching ranks since he retired as a player in 2014. Never really made it in his NFL career, was just kind of a practice squad member for a little bit. But quickly goes from a grad assistant at Northwestern to an offensive assistant to the Chargers in 2016. Coached at Notre Dame and Alabama in the college ranks for 5 years. Lastly, under Nick Saban at Bama there in his final season. And then, Bama kind of turns the staff over, and Tommy Rees heads to Cleveland as a pass game specialist and tight ends coach. And now he's got this offensive coordinator position. So pretty impressive ascension for the young Tommy Rees. If things go well in Cleveland, he could absolutely start to climb as one of these ascending offensive minds. But yeah, I'm excited to see what he can do. Seems like a rational promotion, and Kevin Stefanski kind of taking back the reins a little bit too. Last year almost felt like a regression in the sense of Stefanski being in command of this offense. They bring in Ken Dorsey, who's a little bit more experienced as a play caller, who, his scheme technically aligned with Deshaun Watson's theoretical strengths, even though he doesn't have any strengths at this point in his career. Again, the Deshaun Watson of it all, just kind of derailing all of this. But to me, this speaks to Stefanski kind of taking back the reins, wanting to do what he wants to do. And I think that's all for the best, because Stefanski at his best does this pretty well. It's just been a while since we've seen it. But we do got to talk about the defensive coaching here. Jim Schwartz. I do still love Jim Schwartz, but it has felt like the sort of immediate shine of that 2023 Browns defense that for the first 12 weeks just kind of took the league by storm when Jim Schwartz came in. And that was a big reason I didn't love Stefanski winning Coach of the Year in 2023, because it's pretty much the reason they won games was because of Jim Schwartz's defense for the first 2/3 of that season. So it was like an immediate wave of, oh my God, welcome back, Jim Schwartz. What an amazing hire. And then things completely fell off the rails on the last third of that season. A disastrous playoff performance against rookie CJ Stroud and the Texans. Just busted coverages everywhere, bad tackling, bad run defense. And then last year's Browns defense, a little bit more of the same. And Cleveland actually finishes, despite Myles Garrett putting up another Defensive Player of the Year caliber performance, they finished 25th in defensive DVOA, and they just haven't really been able to recapture that magic from when Jim Schwartz first arrived. So I do still like Jim Schwartz. They rank pretty damn solid for defensive coaching. I think you can still trust in him, at least for the year, with maybe a little bit of hesitation that he's a little bit too over-aggressive and the team kind of lacks discipline. And they're, again, just over-aggressive would be kind of the word I would go with there. But still a B grade for pass defense coaching, which ranks 13th to 21st. And 28th to 29th for run defense coaching. As far as what Jim Schwartz's scheme is, I alluded to it, but it is a very aggressive, attacking kind of 4-2 defense. On the back end, they love Press man coverage, they love to blitz and run fire zones, to just run a nice cover one blitz. And then up front, they like to run twists and stunts and blitzes and just fly at you north and south all day. Unfortunately, this is a diversion from where so much of the league is at right now, with all of the quarters coverage, the too high structures, and with Jim Schwartz being an aggressive, attacking, single high priority defense. There have been a lot of explosive plays allowed in Cleveland. Even if you get these dynamic moments with the pass rush and these lockdown drives where you're just overwhelmed by this Browns approach, it's kind of like a streaky fastball pitcher in baseball that maybe doesn't have a great off-speed pitch. And if you miss your spots, like, you can get rocked that given week. And we've seen a lot of that with kind of busted coverages. And if a DB loses on the back end, there's not really a whole lot of support around them to clean up big plays. So it's a very live by the sword, die by the sword defense. I am curious if they kind of wind things back a little bit. I wouldn't say that there's been any signs that they're planning on doing that, but you get beat by this enough times. I do wonder if they, I think Jim Schwartz is an experienced, smart, former head coach and good defensive mind, that he's not such a one-track mind that he can't maybe run a little bit more too high, cover 2, cover 4 type of stuff on top of some of the aggressiveness. So, hopefully they can kind of get things straightened out a little bit without losing that aggressive element. But that is who they are and who they've been in the Jim Schwartz era. And I will say, a defense like this will always benefit from an offense that can have the ball a little bit longer. So if the Browns are milking the clock, running the ball more, keeping these DBs that do get left on an island and these pass rushers that they do ask a lot of to win early, if they can be on the field a little bit less, that would be very good, obviously, for this Browns defense. So it's a bit of a unique conversation with this coaching staff, where I kind of like the dudes that are running the show here. It's just they do have a lot to prove at this stage. And they, of course, have to overcome the Browns culture of it all. Ownership here just reeks and permeates the stink throughout the rest of the organization. And it's a uniquely challenging job, I think, for these guys to overcome that. But let's now get into the roster breakdown for the Cleveland Browns and, of course, talk about this 4-way position battle at quarterback. Wow, this is certainly something, man. And to me, you could make a case that any of these guys will or should be the starter day one for the Cleveland Browns. And I think the best way for me to kind of analyze this is kind of put a percentage mark on at least how I think these quarterbacks' chances are of being at least the day one starter are, and then talk about them in that order. And I think that's an effective way to break this thing down, but also a pretty fun look at it as well. So everyone's going to have an opinion on this room and who's going to start and who's going to succeed and all that. But what I landed on was a 31% chance that Kenny Pickett is the starter. Shedeur Sanders right behind that at 28%. And then Dylan Gabriel a little bit behind that at 21%. And then Joe Flacco just behind that at 20%. So a pretty tight race between these 4 players. So I will go through these guys one by one in that order. But just from more of a macro outlook on this approach by the Cleveland Browns, it really is kind of like the dodgeball quote.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
We spend so much time talking about if you've got a problem in a room, just, kind of throw shit at the wall and see what sticks. That is tougher with quarterback, where there's only so many reps to go around when you can't get hit, and it's just hard to get a full read on how these guys are from practice. You can get a sense of it, but not a full read. And then you get to preseason, and it's like you're trying to, split up who's getting reps with the ones versus who's coming in with all these garbage backups and a team that isn't much of a team at all, if that makes sense. And when you're talking about even a 2 quarterback battle, it's tough to determine a true winner. Much more practical to do that though. But with 4 players that all have a legitimate kind of argument for the job, that is a lot to juggle for Kevin Stefanski and company. So I'm very curious to see kind of how they manage this. Like I'll be interested to follow camp and like how are they splitting up reps and preseason and like how are they actually going to manage this? It's unheard of. But let's start with Kenny Pickett, who again I gave about a 31% chance of winning this job. And I don't think that's a popular opinion right now. I think most people are actually leaning Joe Flacco. Look, we'll talk about Flacco for a second, but if Flacco wins this starting job, to me, that means something went seriously wrong with these 3 younger quarterbacks. That, to me, is sort of a break glass in case of emergency comfort zone for them because Flacco did play for this team in 2023. But I think Pickett being the veteran QB in this room that actually has a little bit of mobility, a former first round pick that I don't think is oozing with upside, right? But I do think his upside is higher than Joe Flacco. The mobility element there is key to be able to extend plays and make stuff happen on third down as opposed to just kind of chucking it out there and throwing a bunch of picks when there's nothing there on a third down. I think that absolutely gives you more upside with a Kenny Pickett. But also, this is an offense that likes to run play action boots. And when they tried to run play action boots with Joe Flacco, like he cannot escape on that backside leak. And because of that, defensive ends are able to just completely collapse against the threat of the run. Whereas Kenny Pickett, that backside end, you at least are holding him with your play action naked game. So there's an aspect of mobility that I think does matter here that I do think Stefanski will value. And I think Kenny Pickett has an edge over Shedeur and Dylan Gabriel, at least early in camp, in terms of running an NFL offense, going through reads, calling the play, knowing the offense, knowing the playbook in that sense. Kenny Pickett isn't some surgeon of a pocket passer or anything, but he's not a complete, dud in that sense. His issues have been more like questionable decision-making, out of structure, some accuracy issues. Not so much like, okay, he literally can't run an offense. He's not great at it, but he's not horrible at it either. So I don't know. I think there's an off chance that Kenny Pickett is okay. And overall, I understand Kenny Pickett has become a bit of a meme for a lot of NFL fans. And I'm not here to be the leader of the Kenny Pickett fan club or anything like that, but I do think he was done slightly dirty in Pittsburgh. He had a bunch of interceptions in that rookie season that just straight up were not his fault. Batted passes, dropped balls leading to picks. Literally the first game he came in against the Jets, for example, he had 3 interceptions and PFF determined 0 of them were turnover-worthy plays. So this narrative starts very early. And then you get to 2023, his second season, and that was still Matt Canada, right? The Steelers under Matt Canada were they were just the worst called offense I've seen in a long time. I don't love shredding teams for their play calling, but it was relevant in Pittsburgh. And then they fired Matt Canada, finally, who had been his coordinator the whole time. And that firing lined right up with an injury for Kenny Pickett. So he gets one start, just 1 week of his entire Steelers career without Matt Canada. And he had one of the best games of his career against the Cincinnati Bengals. He throws for 278 yards, a PFF passing grade of 91.8, 4 big-time throws, 0 turnover-worthy plays, an awesome performance. And then week 13 happens. He gets injured. They go to Mason Rudolph, who plays like Mason Rudolph. He had one good game against the Seahawks that helped them get into the playoffs that year. But that came to a screeching halt. They kind of rode the hot hand when my take at the time was why wouldn't you put Kenny Pickett back in there for the playoffs? But they completely, abandoned ship on Kenny Pickett. And I can't fully blame them for that, right? I'm not the leader of the Kenny Pickett fan club or anything like that. But I don't think the Steelers did fully right by Kenny Pickett. He spends a year in Philadelphia, gets a couple starts, looked shaky at first, settled down in the second half against Washington, looked pretty good against Dallas. All I'm saying is that I do think the public narrative on Kenny Pickett is a little bit too harsh relative to kind of who he is as a quarterback, how he's played, and how realistic it is that he's going to be their week one starter. And I think flipping Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who was a lost cause at this point, for at least an adequate dart throw in Kenny Pickett was smart. So he's my choice. Again, 31% chance that happens. Could blow back in my face, like whatever. It's not some, pound the table strong take. It's just having thought about it. That's where I'm at. And I would say there's a chance he gets them through the season, kind of allows them to do what they want to do offensively, gets a little bit more consistency out of this offense and allows them to call the offense the way they want it, kind of what we've talked to this point, kind of plays point guard, uses his feet and extends some plays on third downs because he is a good scrambler. And then realistically, they're in a position where they still might draft a quarterback high next year, depending on how things play out, but kind of be that transition bridge quarterback for them. That would probably be the outlook on Kenny Pickett. Even if I'm kind of defending him here, this isn't like a player that I view maybe with like Sam Darnold upside or something like that, where he becomes a franchise quarterback for somebody. I don't really expect that. But then I do think Shedeur has a good shot here. We spent a lot of time talking about Shedeur and his fall in the draft. If you really want my take on that side of things, you can go watch my AFC North draft grades video. I am of the opinion that ownership kind of stepped in and forced this team's hand to take Shedeur Sanders that late in the draft. And I do think that leads to some muddiness where, well, you already spent a third-round pick on Dylan Gabriel. You're adding an extra body to this position battle that my opinion is that the coaching staff didn't really want to have a four-person position battle here, right? Because of what we said, it's difficult to manage that workload and actually find out who the best quarterback is here. But now that he is here, Shedeur's not a bad quarterback prospect, right? Like, I had him as a late first, early second round guy for a reason. He throws with exceptional ball placement. He's got great playmaking instincts out of structure. I think there is a clutch factor about him. And frankly, I love that for his sake, I love that he fell in the draft because I hated the way he handled the pre-draft process. I think he did, or at least him plus his dad kind of entered the draft with this arrogance factor. Now he's got a chip on his shoulder that, I don't know that he fully needed it, but I think it's really going to help him put the extra time in to really evolve, because he's a guy that I've always felt like has to kind of be maybe a Dak Prescott, Kirk Cousins, Jared Goff-esque player where his best trait has to be his mind, because, and he's a better athlete than guys like Cousins and Goff, but he doesn't have the strongest arm. He's not going to dominate you with physical traits. He's got to beat you with processing and anticipation, and it was okay for a college prospect, not great for a college prospect. It's going to have to be great at the next level. And falling to the fifth round, picking Tom Brady's number, firing Dion as his agent, like, that probably is the best case scenario for Shedeur to make it in the league. So now that this has all happened, and I've voiced my frustrations with how he and his camp kind of handled the pre-draft process, and I kind of celebrated him falling because of it, because I got a lot of flack from people out there when I said Shedeur is not a good enough quarterback prospect to give the middle finger to the NFL and not throw at the combine and blow off the Shrine Bowl and all this stuff. And that hurt him, and it hurt his draft stock, and he's going to have to now come in and compete and win this job. But I do think there's a pretty decent chance that he is just the best quarterback in this room and he wins this job. And I think that's what Browns fans are probably hoping for at this point, right? And I think that could be fun to watch and an okay outcome for this Browns team. Now, I do think part of Shedeur's fall in the draft goes beyond just the idea that, he blew off the NFL and he was this arrogant prick. Like, I think it reached a point in the draft where he was starting to fall out of respect for his game, if that makes sense. Let me explain. Like, think if Shedeur is this kind of, okay, best case, he's kind of a Kirk Cousins, maybe, absolute best case, like Dak Prescott, kind of a tier 3 quarterback, right? A lot of teams don't want to settle for that, right? You want to swing for more of a tier 2 or elite quarterback to really put you in a position to win, especially in the AFC. And in this division, hell, they got to beat Lamar and Joe Burrow. But I do think a lot of teams kind of passed on Shedeur because they were like, well, he'll probably win the job. He'll probably be okay. And then we kind of get stuck a little bit in QB purgatory. So hopefully, he can be this elite mental surgeon of a pocket passer, provide some playmaking with his feet and transcend that narrative, transcend his physical traits and become a great tier 2 quarterback. It's not impossible for any quarterback. Upside is a tricky conversation at this position. Tom Brady is the most accomplished quarterback of all time, right? And he's not oozing with physical traits, right? Obviously, you pray that happens. But I think a part of, I think why the Browns really didn't want Shedeur, or at least why Stefanski and Andrew Berry, in my opinion, did not want Shedeur is, he probably will be the starter, and he probably will play okay in Stefanski's offense, and he probably kind of will get you stuck in that Kirk Cousins world of quarterbacks, which Stefanski's familiar with. That's more of a conversation for a future day. I think you can at least keep a positive spin on it and say Shedeur's got a legitimate chance at winning this QB battle. It wouldn't stun me if he's the week 1 quarterback, but I think the probability of him being their starting quarterback goes up every week, because as much as I praised some aspects of Kenny Pickett, there's a whole nother side of things where he just sucks. He gets benched week 4, and then you're on to QB2, which I think is a pretty good chance of being Shedeur, because I just think he's a better quarterback than Dylan Gabriel and Joe Flacco. And at some point, you forget about the draft and just want to win football games. So there's your Shedeur analysis. And then you got Dylan Gabriel, 24-year-old rookie, lefty, weak arm, and those things will be working against him. But working in his favor is, number one, he was actually drafted ahead of Shedeur. This is the guy that this Brown staff picked out and felt like this was the guy they wanted to work with. And then additionally, compared to Shedeur and even Kenny Pickett, I think there's a case that Dylan Gabriel has the best mind for the position. The old verbiage is never forego an open pass as the quarterback. And Kenny Pickett will, pass up open throws. Shedeur Sanders will pass up open throws. Dylan Gabriel on tape as a guy that was second all-time passing yards in college football history with, 60-something games started. He understands that. And if Stefanski is scheming things up, getting him open reads, Dylan Gabriel will hit it, and he will hit it generally accurately and on time. And then he's also got a little bit of mobility to add on top of that and some creativity in that sense. But the traits are not working in his favor. And I don't also think it's a guarantee that he grasps the playbook and is kind of running things better than maybe a Kenny Pickett or a Joe Flacco either. So, he's going to be in the mix for those reasons, but probably not my bet to make it. And part of me almost feels bad for him that they ended up with Shedeur, because things were shaping up for him to maybe have a good opportunity here in Cleveland, but it just muddies things. But hey, competition supposedly breeds excellence, right? So I put him at 21% chance he wins this job. And then you have Joe Flacco, which I don't want to spend a lot of time on Joe Flacco, even though a lot of people think he's the presumed starter. To me, he's their, again, break glass in case of emergency option. If all these younger quarterbacks just look like dog shit, and Stefanski's sitting there in week 3 of the preseason, and he's like, I don't want to lose my job this year. I'm going back to Joe, who did some good stuff for us in 2023. The beauty of Joe Flacco is you don't have to give him a ton of reps. You know exactly who he is. He already knows the playbook. He's been here before. And I'll reiterate, I'm very curious to see how they manage all these reps. But that's also why I'm kind of going against him being the starter, because if he's not playing and not getting reps, I think there's a decent chance that one of these other 3 guys starts to look okay. And then they will go with the younger option because this is a youth movement. You know, going with, 40-year-old Joe, he's 40 now, right? Yeah, he turned 40 a couple months ago. Like, going with that does nothing for this Browns team other than lift the floor slightly, but it's not like the floor is that high with Joe Flacco. In fact, some weeks things look very ugly with Joe Flacco. We saw that in 2023 in Cleveland, where he basically just came in with nothing to lose and just started chucking deep balls. It's not like they were truly running the system. They were just taking deep shots, and Amari Cooper bailed him out a bunch of times, and then they get to the playoffs, and he looks bad. He played a bunch in Indianapolis last year. It wasn't great, mostly. So he's very much their fallback option, in my opinion. And then you do still have kind of Deshaun Watson lurking. Personally, and I'm curious to see how they manage this as well, I'd tell him to stay home. Like, he is on this roster by only a matter of logistical necessity. They can't really cut him because of what it does to the cap. But if I'm running this football team, Deshaun Watson does not, everybody delete his phone number, block him. He does not get to come into the facility. You can watch the games on TV, but you are no longer a member of the Cleveland Browns. You can officially fuck off, and we're cutting you as soon as we can. And if you want to start caring about your football career and rehab the ankle and go try to win football games for someone else in the future, good on you. But that will not be as a member of the Cleveland Browns. That is how I'm proceeding there. So there you go. There is your position battle. I have got to hear from you guys in the comments who you think is the week 1 starter for the Cleveland Browns, because this could go in so many different directions. And I think if your answer is any of these 4 guys, you've probably got a pretty good case for it. So let me know down below. Obviously, this group was never going to rank very high. They came in as the 31st quarterback room for me. Still 29th in passing. There's a couple other quarterbacks that I think from a passing perspective give you even less here. That's yet to be revealed in the series. But the lack of a running element that some of those other guys have drops the overall QB ranking down to 31st, ahead of just Tyler Shook and what the Saints are working with there. But let's move on to the weapons, who these quarterbacks are throwing to here. The Browns have an interesting room here. I'm actually quietly excited to see what these guys are going to look like. They came in with a B- grade for me, ranking 22nd to 26th, a respectable grade, frankly. It's just this league is loaded with great groups of weapons. So even if you've got a pretty solid group, as I think Cleveland does, you're going to rank, you could still end up ranking pretty low. But let's start with Jerry Jeudy, who really impressed me last season, man. When they acquired him and gave him a pretty hefty contract, I know myself and many people were like, what are they doing? Like, how does he fit here? Like, he is not worth what they paid him, or even, trading to acquire him. He had kind of fallen out in Denver. You got Steve Smith calling him out and all this stuff. But he gets a new opportunity here, and it was a slow start for sure with Deshaun Watson playing and then Amari Cooper still there. That was a big thing. I thought his skill set was a little redundant with Amari Cooper. But clearly they had a little bit of foresight there. They had traded away Amari Cooper around, week 6? And then from week 8 onward, Jerry Jeudy was 3rd in the NFL in receiving yards. They were peppering him with targets. He was the focal point of their passing game. And it was an instant reminder of just how much I loved Jerry Jeudy coming out of college as genuinely one of the best route running receiving prospects I've ever seen. And I don't say that lightly, but every draft season, I still refer to Jerry Jeudy when I'm talking about the best route running prospects. I exclusively remember talking about him when I talked about Ladd McConkey, saying he's one of the best route running prospects since Jerry Jeudy. And you watch his Browns tape and you see that, the acceleration, the quick feet, the snappy cuts, it's all in there to be one of the premium separators in the entire NFL. And frankly, with how he fit in the second half of the year, hoping that this offense can stabilize a little bit with plenty of opportunities for Jerry Jeudy to still get fed here. Hell, you could argue that the up arrow should be on his graphic there with an 81 rating from me with how he played in the second half of last season. The reason I didn't go that route is I do think 81 is a respectable rating, kind of indicating that in an ideal situation, he would still be your number 2 and you could establish more of a consistent alpha type of player. And I also didn't put the up arrow on him because, unfortunately, as productive and as great as he looked as a separator, the hands and the ball skills, the drops and the low contested catch win rate, it's always plagued him and it's not going anywhere. He is very much that super athlete whose Achilles heel is he just struggles to track the ball in and he trades some physicality at the catch point for that speed and quickness and having a more slender frame. Last season, he still dropped 10% of his targets. And unfortunately, he goes on that hot streak. And then the last 3 games of the season, 6 drops. He comes down with just 8 out of 21 contested catch targets. That's 38%, which is very much in line with his 35% career rate. Like, he has his weaknesses and deficiencies as a player, and ultimately is why you would prefer him to be your number 2 in time. But he is still a guy that threatens to all 3 levels of the field. He can still win really difficult catches. It's funny, we just talked about Calvin Ridley, another Alabama product, in that last deep dive with the Titans. Judy and Ridley are very similar in the sense that they do have frustrating drops and aren't great contested catch ball winners, but they can still somehow at their size make these ridiculous leaping catches sometimes. So Judy is still a guy that quarterbacks can put the ball up for, and he can still make you right at times, just not super consistently. But I do think for where the Browns are at, Jared Judy's going to eat this year. And at just 26 years old, like, they were justified in going to get him and giving him that money, and he's all of a sudden maybe underpaid. I like where he sits within this offense. And obviously every team would love to have that true alpha, dominant number 1 wide receiver and all that. But I actually think there's a world with, as we look at the rest of these younger wide receivers, if these other guys can step up and fill into their roles, there is actually a world where Jerry Jeudy can exist perfectly fine as this team's quote-unquote best wide receiver, as long as he's surrounded by a nice group of complementary skill sets. And I really like how the rest of these guys fill in there. And that starts, of course, with Cedric Tillman. At 6'3", 210 pounds, he gives you everything theoretically that Jerry Jeudy doesn't. A bigger-bodied perimeter target, someone that can more consistently catch balls over the middle of the field, more of a run-blocking element for a run-heavy team. If you're going to have a Jerry Jeudy, you want more of a physical presence. And Cedric Tillman, look, man, I'm not ready to give up on the idea that he can emerge as a legitimate number 2 wide receiver in the league. I don't think he's that far away from it. He had a mostly forgettable rookie season as he tried to climb the depth chart on a bad offense. And then last season, they bring in Jerry Jeudy. They kind of forego Cedric Tillman's opportunities early, but then they trade away Amari Cooper. And with the snap of a finger, this group just made so much more sense, because instead of having, for a team that runs a lot of 12 personnel, instead of having Jeudy and Cooper out there, even if, at least at the time, we thought Amari Cooper was better than Cedric Tillman, you want those complementary skill sets, and this just made so much more sense with the route runner type and then the big physical presence next to him. And really, at the snap of a finger, Cedric Tillman gets out there. I don't know the exact week that they traded Amari Cooper, but he had 4 targets in the first 6 weeks of the season. Week 7, he had 11 targets. Catches 8 balls for 80 yards. The next week, 9 targets, 7 receptions, 100 yards, 2 touchdowns. The best game of his career there against Baltimore, week 8. Week 9, 6 catches for 75 yards. Week 11, 3 catches for 47 yards. Still not bad. And things were just going really, really well. Not just with Amari Cooper gone, but Deshaun Watson gone at that point, which is good for everybody. But then week 12 happens the next week, and he gets hurt early in the game. I want to say the last play of his season there was on a nice reception where he ended up fumbling the ball away. at the end of the run after catch. But that was the last we saw of Cedric Tillman last year. So he looked really promising, made a ton of sense in this role, running the routes that he's good at. A lot of dig routes. We still have more to see from him in terms of running more of the vertical route tree to, he doesn't have great speed to stack corners on the outside, but working some of those comebackers and the hitch routes to force DBs to respect him, in which case he can then set up double moves and get open deep, where I do think he can catch the ball deep down the field. He caught 5 out of 7 contested catch targets last year. 71% is remarkable. It's all in there, man. To me, he's just a product of this offense needing more consistency, him getting that playing time, getting those opportunities. I really do like myself some Cedric Tillman, and he is a core variable in terms of how this team can feel about this wide receiver room this year and beyond. Very excited to see what he can do here. And then I want to talk about Harold Fannin. I wanted to really list him as one of the starting pieces here. It's not going to be a full snap load for him at all. We're going to talk about Deontay Johnson, Jamari Thrash. Some of these other guys might get worked in here. But I think this was a very intentional draft pick. And we are going to see a lot of Harold Fannin here within this offense because, for one, we talked about it, they want to be in 12 personnel. And Harold Fannin as a wing tight end in the sort of Jonnu Smith family of roles where he doesn't have to dig out 260-pound defensive ends and be a true inline tight end, but you can get him climbing the perimeter to find weak side linebackers and safeties, or blocking cross formation, or pulling out as a lead blocker on a toss, or just lining him up as a fullback, kind of using him as that flex blocking piece, as that true F tight end. He's gonna be their day one starter in that role. They didn't bring Jordan Akins back, who played that role for them last year, did okay, but if they didn't get Harold Fannin, I think they probably bring Jordan Akins back, but they don't need him. They have Harold Fannin. I think he is viewed as a starter heading into the first week of this season. But honestly, where I start to get really excited about Harold Fannin and why I had to list him as one of the 5 core starters here, as someone who had Harold Fannin on my top 50 big board, really bought into him as an awesome football player. And if you want an even further conversation about everything I love about Harold Fannin, please go check out my tight end rankings video. He ended up my tight end 3 in this draft class. But every fiber of my being needed to see him go to a spot where he wouldn't just play some tight end, he would play a lot of slot wide receiver in every bit of that Cooper Kupp role in sort of a Shanahan-inspired offense. I think some of Harold Fannin's best tape was as a receiver, as a slot wide receiver, even flexed out wide as an outside wide receiver. The way he can box out guys for tough catches on corner routes and digs, the way he can set up some of his routes and be savvy to exist in that phase. There's a lot of like slower Brock Bowers to his game. And you look at the way the Raiders use Brock Bowers, it was all over the field, not just as a tight end, many of which times as a slot weapon. And Harold Fannin in a lot of these condensed formations where he's technically a receiver, but it's the same idea that the Rams have thrived with, where you are in 11 and a half personnel, where that third wide receiver is kind of half tight end, half wide receiver. Harold Fannin can be dominant in that role. He was at Bowling Green, and I really think they have a plan to get him going in that role. And for the life of me, I would bet that he outsnaps Deontay Johnson and Jamari Thrash as their third or fourth, receiving entity on this offense. So had to highlight Harold Fannin. Him and Cedric Tillman, like these two guys, like the idea is there. Go execute. Kevin Stefanski, help these guys emerge. These quarterbacks, help these guys develop. Like, I really want to see this group come together because this trio gets me excited in terms of who these guys are as players and how they could all play off each other within this offense. But at the same time, the Browns have hurt me before, and I don't want to get too overly excited. But if the Browns are going to shatter this 30th ranking in this deep dive series, I think this is what we're looking at right now is probably where it could happen. So I get a little bit fired up about those guys. But then you do have David Njoku, who is probably going to be second in targets in this offense, maybe third behind Tillman, maybe fourth behind Fannin. I don't know, but at least heading into the year, you feel pretty good about saying, yeah, he's going to have his role within this offense. Got to stay healthy. He had an ankle injury last year that kind of made it a forgettable season, but you go back to 2023 and he looked awesome, man. He looked like a top 5 tight end in football, was mossing defenders left and right, and had really broken through as one of the premium run after catch threats in the entire NFL. So 2024 kind of pumped the brakes on that a little bit just because of the durability and kind of a lost season. But even then, he still did get out there, made some of those incredible plays. I mean, dude, like, he does have some of the best just raw, spectacular catchability of any player in the NFL as well. It's just, at the end of the day, it's just a big year for David Njoku. I don't know if there's enough momentum to feel great about getting 2023 David Njoku back and saying that the arrow is going to continue to point up on him. But you know the talent is in there, and he's a good starting tight end, if nothing else. You wish it was a little bit better and more consistent as a blocker in this offense, especially with everything we talked about Harold Fannin. If you're going to have that role, you want your starting tight end to really be a good blocker first, to contribute to the run game. And for that reason, I don't know if David Njoku is like their forever Y tight end at this point, depending on how Harold Fannin plays. But he is going to play that role this season. And it's not like he's a horrible blocker. He just is inconsistent at it. And that really rounds out your core group of pass catchers. You do have a pretty thin group, in my opinion, in Cleveland. They did sign Deontay Johnson. He's a complete wild card, almost head case at this point. I thought it was weird when Carolina didn't want him, and then he ends up in Baltimore. That was weird because they could have used him, and he ends up out of Baltimore. Then what? Houston ended up picking him up, right? Then they release him a month later, and then Baltimore has him for a minute after that. Then they let him go. Cleveland ends up, like, he's just been moving all over the place. There is obviously something going off the field with Deontay Johnson. He's kind of been next in line of Steelers wide receivers to leave Pittsburgh and just be a complete head case. But he is very similar as a football player to Jerry Jeudy when he's on. And even just last season, Deontay Johnson was I think a very key contributor to Bryce Young's resurfacing as a quarterback. Like, he was a very important part of that Panthers team last year at the beginning of things, because he gets open and he allowed Bryce to kind of get back on time and play in structure. Then things kind of, they moved on from him, obviously, and they got a decent draft pick for him. Again, even just last season, he played good football. He is, just like Jerry Jeudy, an excellent route runner, hyper athlete in terms of acceleration and foot speed and just route running technique, but drops galore, not a big guy, not a contested catch target. He is theoretically an excellent backup to Jerry Jeudy. And if you get into more third and long situations, he is going to be a much more ideal slot wide receiver than Harold Fannin. So that's where the kind of starting rotation starts to play in there. I like how he fits in the exact role that we're placing him at here. I think it's a good signing for nothing. He also just might not make this team depending on his practice behavior and how hungry he is and all of that. But it's a good situation where he has been written off. Now he's got to kind of focus back in. I do think he's a talented kind of number 2 wide receiver when he's at his best. But something has gone awry with him, right? So what was complete wild card? But why not pick him up? And then Jamari Thrash is right in that same category. Undersized, quick-footed guy, not as proven as a route runner, but showed some really good flashes at Louisville. We didn't see too much of him last year, but I would anticipate that he gets in the mix. I don't know that he's going to be like a full-on rotational starter. I think that depends on if Deontay Johnson makes this team. But if Deontay doesn't make this team, you would place Thrash exactly into that kind of wide receiver 3 role for real drop back passing situations, third and long type of deals. But, I thought he was a nice prospect for where they got him, and we'll see where he goes. Then you got DeAndre Carter's really just here to return kicks and punts for them. Michael Woods and David Bell are their kind of possession type of wide receivers. I would imagine that'll be a competition for one of those two guys to make it as a kind of wide receiver 5 special teamer type. I don't know that both would make it. And then you have kind of 5 other undrafted types trying to make a name for themselves. Your tight end depth definitely is thin. If anything were to happen to David Njoku, I would fully expect that this team looks through the waiver wire to find a full-size tight end, and maybe they do still do that because Njoku was getting banged up last year. Browns could be a sneaky like Cole Kmet or Tyler Higbee trade destination. You heard it here first, I suppose. Both those teams drafted tight ends early, but keep an eye on that just because, Blake Whiteheart, very unestablished. Brennan Bates, undrafted, unproven type, and Trey McKitty never worked out for the Chargers. So really nothing to speak of in terms of tight end depth. And then we didn't really mention the running backs. I don't know that these guys are going to play too much of a role in this passing game. I will say Quinshon Judkins was a really nice receiving back when they used him as a receiving back at Ohio State. He was splitting reps with Travion Henderson, so it was limited looks, but I think he's got smooth hands. He's got excellent contact balance out in space. He's got everything in him to be a pass blocker. It's just, we didn't see a lot of it because Travion Henderson was like the best pass blocking back in college football last year. So obviously they weren't going to use Judkins in that way. So he's got more to prove in that sense, but could Quinshon Judkins be something like a Kareem Hunt-esque receiving threat out of the backfield in the screen game and the dump down game? Yeah, absolutely. Like he could emerge as a contributor in that sense. I really do think he has full three down potential. Jerome Ford, in the meantime, has done some good stuff on screens. He's an explosive play threat. Dylan Sampson has a lot of potential in that regard, but went very underutilized there at Tennessee. So not a ton to speak on in terms of pass catching backs out of the backfield. But it's not something I'm necessarily worried about either. So there's your group of weapons. Honestly, I am just excited to see this group. Again, they rank 22nd to 26th, near the bottom of the league, but still a B- grade, a respectable group, and absolutely a group with the potential to be more towards the top half of the league if some of these young pieces can come together. And hell, maybe if David Njoku can kind of get back to the 2023 version of himself. But let's move on to talk about these running backs as an element of the backfield and the run game. They actually rank identical there, ironically, 22nd to 26th, but with a C+ grade at running back. That is exclusively because Quinshon Judkins is a rookie coming in, can't rank him too high, but still a 77 rating from me here for the rookie Quinshon Judkins. It's about as respectable of a rating you'll see from me for a second round pick. And I am a huge fan of Quinshon Judkins. He was my RB3 in this draft class. I think he was in a hilariously deep running back class. I feel pretty convicted saying he was the most underrated player in that group. I think there was a little bit of prospect fatigue with him. He was a top-rated back as a sophomore. Goes to Ohio State. Henderson's the explosive big play threat, kind of the new thing out of that Ohio State backfield. Judkins was always the better pro prospect, in my opinion, even if I liked Travion Henderson as a day two guy. But was obviously happy to see Judkins get drafted ahead of his Ohio State teammate there. And I love the landing spot, man. A big reason I love Judkins so much is I think he is a true 3-down bell cow type of prospect. There's nothing you cannot do with Judkins. He's got the size, the speed. He doesn't have this tremendous workload in his background where you feel worried about long-term durability and giving him 25 touches a game if the game script demands it. Like I said, he does catch passes out of the backfield. But ultimately what makes him really appealing as a 3-down back is the vision. Like, this dude had remarkable vision in terms of pressing the hole, not unnecessarily bouncing runs outside. And that was something that drove me crazy about Travion Henderson. But the way that Quinshon Judkins can read out blocks, attack the line of scrimmage, navigate his way into the hole while also staying aware of cutback lanes, and when he really needs to put his head down and hit a hole hard before it closes up, he stands out amidst a really deep group of running backs. And one of the pro comps I discussed with him was actually Aaron Jones. Not because of the size necessarily, but the running style. With everything we just said about the vision, there was so much about him that just reminded me of Aaron Jones. And likewise, the knock on Judkins is he's not the most creative at the tackle point. I wouldn't say Aaron Jones is either. He's going to put on a stiff arm. He's going to try to run through you. He's going to run with contact balance, and he can break tackles, but that is why he was a cut below, obviously, Ginty, but even like a Marion Hampton was so good at breaking tackles. Judkins is just good at it. Now, if you go back to his Ole Miss tape in 2023, there was a little bit more creativity to his running style. So maybe there's even more in there, but I'm really all in on the Judkins train here. Like if we're talking about fantasy football here, I've already ended up with him in a couple of my dynasty drafts. If you're playing best ball and underdog fantasy, like absolutely someone I would target as a second running back for your fantasy team. I think he comes in, starts day one, and has a chance to be one of the true bell cow backs in terms of workload in the entire NFL. Now, the efficiency might not be quite as crazy because the rest of this offense is still figuring some stuff out, but I really, outside of some of the lack of creativity to his overall run game, I run out of bad things to say about Quinshon Judkins very, very quickly, and I loved this draft pick and fully expect that in time, the Browns will not be, 22nd to 26th ranking in terms of backfield, but we do rank these guys kind of at their floor as they head into their, the start of the season, in this case, the start of their careers. I can't come out and just give him a monster rating out the gate. That's not how I do things here. As far as the backups are concerned, Jerome Ford technically still listed as the starter. I think that's going to be pretty short-lived. I think them drafting Quinshon Judkins was intentional in the sense that his vision was so good, and Jerome Ford had probably there were some backs with bad vision last year, but he was up there in terms of starting running backs with the worst vision in the NFL last year. Ford is infuriating to watch because when he sees it, or if he guesses correctly, the speed, the big playability, it's legit, but he's late to see it. He bounces runs outside. The amount of times that I'm sure Kevin Stefanski was looking at tape and saying, Jerome, why did you not go into the perfectly well-blocked C gap? Like, what are we doing here? They were deliberately trying to replace Jerome Ford, and I think that's a big part of why I expect Judkins to be such a bell cow back here. But, if you want to put Ford in now as a backup and say, dude, we're running C gap power, or we're running outside zone, just run fast. And if the blocking's good, you might get a big play out of it. He might still have that role as RB2 here ahead of Dylan Sampson, but he also might lose this job to Dylan Sampson, who provides some of that speed and big playability. Theoretically speaking, Sampson has the track background and the 40 time. Struggled to kind of create explosive runs at Tennessee for one reason or another, but Sampson could bring you that element, but with much better vision on top of that. Sampson can bounce some runs outside at times, but for the most part is much better at anticipating blocks and letting blocks set up as well, which Ford struggles with. So I think them drafting Sampson was also them saying, we need some backs with better vision in here. And I like this spot for Sampson as a backup to Quinshon Judkins. I wasn't all in on the high hype that Dylan Sampson got. There was just a little bit something missing when I watched him. He's a smaller back at 200 pounds that runs with more of a kind of inside patient running style. So that was kind of an awkward combination of skills for me. And then I just wish we got to see more of the speed and the burst than he showed us for the most part at Tennessee. But in the 4th round? Absolutely. And I think he could be a really nice backup to Quinshon Judkins. And then you got Pierre Strong still hanging around as well. He struggled with vision problems himself. But yeah, there's your running backs, and then not too much to discuss with the QB run multiplier. That's never been a big part of Kevin Stefanski's offense. They started to do it a little bit more with Deshaun Watson because he was pretty good at it and he couldn't pass. But, with Kenny Pickett, Shedeur, Dylan Gabriel, they might mix in the occasional read option, but it's pretty minor in terms of contributions from that side of things for how we calculate the run game. But let's conclude the offense with this offensive line. A familiar group. All 5 starters were on this team last year, and starters for the most part. It's kind of a interesting discussion with this group because a couple years ago we viewed this as one of the premium offensive lines in the league with a lot of these same names. But the production from this unit has been very mediocre for about 2 seasons now. And even if on paper you like to be optimistic, as we've done in previous seasons, and say this is going to get better, it just hasn't happened, and these guys aren't getting any younger. So it's tough. Now, they did make some nice veteran signings to hedge against injuries much better this year, which I like. But overall, they come in as my 21st ranked offensive line with C+ grades across the board. And 17th to 22nd in pass blocking and 23rd to 24th in run blocking. Certainly not what they once were, where they were probably top 3 in 2022 for run blocking especially. But let's go through this group. At left tackle is going to be your biggest question mark, at least in terms of caliber of player, and that's DeJuan Jones. Now, I don't hate DeJuan Jones. I don't love DeJuan Jones, but they're seemingly going to give him an opportunity to kind of have this job and develop now that Jedrick Wills is all the way out of the picture here. He's a very unique player. He comes in at 6'8", about 370 pounds. He really is in that Mekhi Becton, Orlando Brown territory in terms of almost oversized offensive tackles. But he's got a crazy wingspan, obviously just like so much mass and length and size at this position that can be difficult for defenders to deal with at times. But for such a big guy, you would think he's a pretty good run blocker, just being able to move guys. And that's actually his biggest problem. He struggles to get off the ball. He struggles to win leverage with a lack of a first step and that lack of leverage advantage that he struggles to get at 6'8". Constantly falls off blocks. He's unbalanced in the run game. If he really connects, he can, push you back a yard or two. But at this point, counting on DeJuan Jones to be anything short of a liability in the run game is probably a bad process. He has proven at this point that he can't really do that. And he wasn't great at it at Ohio State either in the college ranks. But I will say, as a pass blocker, he's had some uglier moments against great athletes. And, trying to get the depth in his kick slide and beat inside counters and account for the lack of foot speed and athleticism that he has is probably always something that will hurt him, just as it does with someone like Orlando Brown. But I do think he can reach a point where he can get enough technique and reaction time to mitigate that, whereas he could potentially be an okay low-end starting pass protecting player for an offensive line, because he is good with his hands. He's got a nasty snatch trap technique. He's got wicked length, and guys do struggle to go through him because he is just so strong. And because he's so strong, even if he's unbalanced and out of position, if he can just get his hands on you, he can at least, slow you down or take you out of the play long enough for the quarterback to make a decision. So I don't hate where he's at as a pass blocker. I really don't. Is he the perfect long-term solution as your franchise left tackle? Obviously, no, very likely not. But I kind of agree with giving him an opportunity here. If he can become a more consistent player with his feet, I think I think you can get by with him. And then at left guard, you have Joel Bitonio. He's just getting older, man. He's going to turn 34 in October, and he contemplated retirement this offseason. Like, I think when they signed Tevin Jenkins, I don't even know if they had a full answer at that point in time. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. I could be confusing my timeline here, but like, he still can play. He's Joel frickin' Bitonio. Like, this was an all-pro guy in his prime, but kind of like we saw at the end of Zach Martin's career, the run blocking just isn't what it used to be in terms of flying off the ball and detonating people in the run game. Still technically sound and assignment sound and all that good stuff. But the pass blocking losses are just coming a little bit more often than you're used to seeing from Joel Bitonio. So, like, still can play. They're happy to have him back. You're hoping he can stay healthy and get through another season as a nice, good starter, maybe their best starter still. But he's certainly not the dominant all-pro version of his old self. Then you got Ethan Pocic at center, who has really settled in as a nice, solid starter for them. Struggled early in his career, but kind of emerged late in his time in Seattle. And then the Browns liked what they saw. He's been starting for 2 years and has been everything they hoped for him on a 3-year, $18 million contract. That's frankly a value at this point. There's just not a lot of bad to say about Ethan Pocic. There's just also not a lot of dominance in his tape, but he's a fairly stable pass protector. You don't want to let him get isolated one-on-one a ton, but he can hang in there and fight. And he's a good athlete. He's a pretty good run blocker as well. So you got a nice center there. And then at right guard, you have Wyatt Teller, who's really been regressing. He's not as old as Joel Bitonio, but he's probably been regressing at a steeper rate than Bitonio. And he's always been a guy that was never a great pass protector, but he's someone that does lose more reps than you would think for a guy that is just a couple years removed from being like a Pro Bowl type of guy. But he is, kind of stiffer footed, and quicker rushers can get around him. He can get upright and let guys beat him with a bull rush at times. So he's just an adequate starter as a pass blocker. He's not a liability, but he will lose. And then as a run blocker, he still has that tenacity. But I do think as he's lost maybe a half a step, he falls off blocks more often. He dips his head and, he looks for those kill shots, and he's not getting them at the same rate as he once did. But he's still an asset in the run game. You're happy to have him. It's just you're hoping he doesn't continue to regress too much harsher, because he's gone, I would say, from all-pro caliber in 2020 and 2021 to good starter in 2022 and 2023 to last year where it was like, yeah, he's kind of just a guy at this point, and he's still rated at a 77 here, getting a little bit of respect from his old self. Honestly, for what he was last year, he might not have even been a full-on, quality starter, more of just an adequate piece. But at the same time, 30 years old, regression as well isn't linear. Some guys just have down years, and it's not completely age-related. I don't know that he's completely fallen off a cliff, and he could have a better year than he had last year as well. So that's part of where that 77 rating comes in. And then Jack Conklin, kind of more of the same, right? He's an older, at this point, kind of injury-prone tackle. He's basically just played 2 seasons worth of snaps in the last 4 total league years here for Cleveland. Took him a while to get back out there from the season ender in 2023. Gets out there week 6, and he was a fine player, right? Definitely feels like the injuries are catching up with him. He's losing in pass protection more than he typically does, but still a nice, consistent player for the most part. But I do think another guy that just isn't quite getting off the ball, hitting his landmarks as consistently as he once did in the run game and falling off blocks more than he once did. Whereas in his prime, he was one of the premium run blocking tackles in football. So he turns 31 this season, and it's just between Bitonio, Teller, and Conklin, it's kind of turned into this headache of knowing exactly what you're going to get from these guys in Cleveland. And I think what they did in free agency was really smart to kind of counteract that, to not run into some of the problems they've run into the last couple of years, hopefully, where you get Cornelius Lucas, who absolutely still has it as, he's He, to me, is the NFL's offensive line equivalent of the NBA's Sixth Man of the Year award. Every single year, it feels like some team has Cornelius Lucas on the roster as a backup plan because they like somebody else. In this case, maybe a Jack Conklin who's regressing or a DeJuan Jones who's younger. But they get to week 11 and they go to Cornelius Lucas, and turns out he is just a lengthy, stable pass protecting option year in, year out for like a 10-year career. The poor guy has never been viewed as a starting caliber player, though I think his play says he should be starting for someone. And yet again, he gets a 2-year, $6.5 million deal. Like, basically nothing here, which is just hilarious. When you think of like Dan Moore getting $20 million a year, Cornelius Lucas is just a straight up better pass protector. But to be fair, a big reason he hasn't been viewed as that long-term starter and isn't getting paid a ton of money is he is a guy that hasn't shown to be like durable for the course of a whole season. And he is just a abysmal run blocker, like just doesn't give you much in that phase. So at least if he's backing up DeJuan Jones, it's going to be more of the same, where he's just not a great athlete, can't really get to those landmarks. The Browns, I think, are probably going to lead the league in running to the right, and you hope that that doesn't become too predictable for the Browns. Hopefully their use of counter can keep defenses on their feet there. But Lucas is also a nice backup for Conklin, who has some of those durability concerns. So I like that they went and got a good backup tackle. And I would definitely bet that we see him one way or another, whether it's Conklin or Jones getting hurt or Jones playing poorly. He's a very nice backup to have. And then after that, it's all undrafted types, probably competing for a 4th roster spot here. We'll see who kind of emerges through the woodworks there. And then their guard depth is very fascinating to me. Tevin Jenkins on a 1-year, $3 million deal could quietly be one of those deals we look back on as like one of the signings of the year. It at least has that potential. Tevin Jenkins, when he played in 13 or 14 games for Chicago last year, he was a kind of Pro Bowl caliber guard. And if he didn't miss those games late in the season, he very well might have made a Pro Bowl. But obviously the durability has been a major issue for him. But he did show he can get through most of a season last year. Like, if Bitonio or Teller went down, God forbid, but if that happens and Tevin Jenkins comes in and plays at like a Pro Bowl level for the last 10 weeks of the season, say, and ends up getting a pretty nice contract here and settles in as kind of a miracle answer to the long-term questions they have at guard with both those guys being old, like, that is a brilliant signing at a great value. I can't believe he didn't get more. I guess the injury stuff makes sense, but he's a phenomenal backup guard. And he's great in both phases. As a former tackle, he's got good technique and pass protection, and he's got nastiness in the run game. So honestly, I think Tevin Jenkins was just straight up a better guard than Wyatt Teller last season. There's also a world where Tevin Jenkins just beats out Wyatt Teller, right? Not to mention he's played tackle in the past. Like, he could be a backup tackle as well. So really, really nice signing. Again, Andrew Berry knows what he's doing here. And then you have a couple of Ohio State prospects there that I'm not quite ready to give up on. Both Zach Zinter and Luke Whippler. Zinter was Michigan. That's going to offend both Michigan and Ohio State fans there. But Zinter was always going to be a kind of draft and stash option. Now, he, I guess, recovered quicker than potentially expected. But if you remember, he was kind of viewed as one of the top guards in that 2023 draft. But I want to say he broke his leg in the Ohio State game, was it? It was one of the last games of the year for Michigan on that championship run. And the stadium started chanting Zach's name, which how many times do you hear an offensive lineman getting his name chanted? But he ended up maybe falling a little bit because of the injury, but goes in the 3rd round. And I loved his run blocking tape. Needed more to clean up in the pass protection. And that showed when he comes out, maybe rushed back a little bit sooner than needed to from the injury, but they felt comfortable enough putting him out there. But yeah, he played. He did okay as a run blocker, but struggled in pass protection. I still absolutely believe in the future for Zach Zinter now with like kind of a full offseason, healthy. Absolutely someone to keep an eye on down the road. I don't know if he gets on the field this year because they have 3 guys ahead of him, but still absolutely someone to be aware of. And then Luke Whippler was an athletic prospect. I want to say he also had injury concerns coming out. We haven't seen him yet. And, Pochich isn't really going anywhere anytime soon, but I think Whippler could be a nice backup center for the Browns if he could stay healthy. And then you got kind of 4 undrafted types as well competing in that room. As far as the run blocking boost from the skill players, it's a 0% for me. I think there's some potential there with how Fannin could be in that role. Troy Hairston's still a young fullback here. David Njoku isn't a complete liability. But you are hoping with this style of offense that these guys can get better. And Cedric Tillman as well, I think can be better than he's shown as a run blocker as well. So there's potential there, but no boost for the run blocking multiplier, which is a part of this final offensive calculation here as we round out the Browns offense. So they did come in as my 30th ranked offense. Just a lot of work to do. That's not a huge surprise with their questions at quarterback, the youth at playmaker, some of the questions on the offensive line. Like, we obviously went through all of it, but 30th for passing game, 26th for run game. Just hoping they can climb up these rankings and be a young team that really comes together. That's really the point of this season, as we've talked about, especially on this offensive side of the ball. But as we head in, ranking teams at their floor, expectations should be pretty low to begin with for this Browns offense, which isn't a huge surprise. But let's flip over to this defensive side of the ball, where we get to start with the best unit for this Browns team and genuinely one of the best defensive lines in the NFL, period. They come inside the top 8 for defensive line, ranking 7th to 8th. But top 5, 3rd to 5th ranking with an A- grade at pass rush. Where they fall down a little bit is with the run defense, where they are more towards the bottom of the league, 25th to 30th for D-line run defense, so a little bit more one-dimensional with this group. Let's break it down. You start with perennial Defensive Player of the Year candidate, and I would still say best defensive player in the NFL in Myles Garrett. Just very little left to say about Myles Garrett. We spent the first several years of his career just kind of waiting to get to his prime for his pass rushing tool belt to round out full circle, for him to fully grow into his body. And for the last 2 years and for the foreseeable future, as he does kind of, I would just say, finesse his way to a contract extension here, kind of demanding a trade and then coming back to become the highest paid non-quarterback in the NFL at $40 million. He's now making about as much per year as guys like Patrick Mahomes or maybe a Kyler Murray are making. But presumably with that extension, we still get to enjoy hopefully a few more years of Myles Garrett in his prime, who is not just a Hall of Famer, but one of those guys you look back on that's kind of a tier above your typical Hall of Famer. I mean, we're talking about the prototype athlete in terms of, a 6'5", 275-pound edge rusher with crazy speed and bend, who has filled out his frame to be one of the best bull rushers in the NFL, if not the best bull rusher in the NFL. And then he's rounded out like a perfectly complete pass rushing tool belt with spin moves and speed to bend, and he can line up over a guard and beat you with a cross facing inside finesse move. Like, there's just nothing he cannot do. If there's anything negative to say about him, it's that he's not an elite run defender. I would argue he's probably just saving himself sometimes a little bit for those pass rushing downs, but it's not like he's anything short of a very good run defender. I mean, you can make a very strong case that the Browns ranking 30th in these power rankings at least have the best player in the NFL. I don't think that's crazy. And I think most of us can be thankful that the Browns did not send Myles Garrett to like the Eagles or the Chiefs, where he would terrorize every other playoff contender. Obviously, the fan of whatever team he ended up on in a theoretical trade situation would have been very lucky to have him. But we get to enjoy him on a relatively harmless Browns team, which, depending how you look at it, is a good or a bad thing. And I do think it's at least worth begging the question if Cleveland themselves might have been better off shipping off Myles Garrett. They already loaded up on draft picks, moving down from the number 2 pick. Presumably, you could have gotten a couple more first-round picks for Myles Garrett with everything we've said about him. But he's back, and he alone essentially makes this defense competent. There is a lot of work left to do around Myles Garrett here, which makes him a very convenient kind of launch point for this defensive conversation as everything revolves around him. But it is a relatively new-look defensive line now. Multiple new starters on the interior, and we'll kind of stick with the edge group and work our way inside with Isaiah McGuire and Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, who are new starters compared to at least where they were heading into last season. Isaiah McGuire here really emerged as a solid player for the Browns. Former 4th-round pick, very young coming out, kind of a developmental traits-based edge guy that's coming into his game a little bit. He actually was one of the better kind of run-defending edge rushers, run-defending edge players in the league last year on a per-snap basis, and definitely earned himself more and more and more playing time as the year went on. And, you know, I think the Browns' run defense isn't great, but they were better this year than last year. And I think Isaiah McGuire's presence in that unit played a pretty nice hand in that. As we'll see, they still have a ways to go there, but hoping to get similar contributions there. And then as a pass rusher, you know, who knows? We're heading into year 3. He's one of these one-dimensional raw pass rushers. He's got a little bit of power to his game. I would say needs to develop a little bit more of a changeup and finesse to his game if he's going to really become kind of a 3-down player. But he's definitely going to be towards the top of the snap getters, if not number 2 among this edge group. We'll see how this all plays out because they signed Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, who rightfully so was pretty cheap for a former first-round pick heading into his second team in his career. Just a 1-year, $4.5 million prove-it deal. Still theoretically has upside, but really just a guy that has won with kind of a speed rush around the corner for the most part for the Bucs and hasn't won that consistently. He's got adequate size and effort against the run, but not a big contributor there. I'm not overly optimistic for this signing, but he should eat up some snaps as a more of a later downs player. You know, unless Isaiah McGuire takes a big step forward, you kind of picture this as your classic. Isaiah McGuire is your early downs effort player, and then Tryon comes in with a little bit more speed off the edge. And then Ogbonnia Okoronkwo is still here. His efficiency has dipped in recent seasons. He is now 30 years old, so, you know, clearly they're not counting on him too much, especially based on what he showed last season, but still has a couple of different crafty ways to get after the quarterback. Very undersized guy, not much of a run defender. He definitely is a 3rd-down pass rush specialist type, but there's a world where he's still the better pass rusher than Joe Tryon as a part of that rotation. Then you still have some interesting names in this edge group. Alex Wright, kind of a lost season last year, started to show some flashes in 2023. So we'll see what he can do. I'm not a huge Alex Wright believer, but he's got a ton of size and athletic ability. Maybe he can you know, take a step forward and surprise some people this year. But I like Cam Thomas. He just hasn't gotten an opportunity yet after being a 3rd-round pick for the Arizona Cardinals. He's now bounced around a little bit. I think he had a pit stop in Kansas City, but he comes to Cleveland, and actually late last season, he probably played his best football to date. Just 63 snaps in a rotation, but did have 3 pressures and a sack on 29 pass rush snaps. Graded out well per PFF as a run defender, so kind of a bigger bodied, high effort, but quick edge rusher. I don't know. I always pegged him as a nice number 3, and I'm not quite ready to dismiss him, considering he hasn't played a ton and hasn't exactly sucked when he has played, even going back to his early time in Arizona. Just for one reason or another, those opportunities haven't come. So we'll keep an eye on him. You got Julian Okwara, who's definitely bounced around. I'd be a little surprised if he made the team. He is more of a rotational pass rusher. It'd be tough to kind of take those jobs from Okoronkwo and Shoyinka, and then Ellerson Smith as well. Once upon a time was drafted by the Giants. Again, probably won't make the team there. But then you go to the interior defensive line, and you get to talk about Mason Graham, which is very exciting. For him to come in as kind of a Robin to Myles Garrett's Batman. If there was a criticism on Mason Graham, it's that he's not the biggest guy, he lacks length, and maybe never going to be this dominant alpha number one defensive lineman. But as a two-way, three-down defensive line prospect that's relatively pro-ready and checks a lot of boxes, this is a really fun landing spot, man, and I'm really excited to see him and Garrett kind of work off each other here. And obviously you can go back and revisit like my draft grades video to kind of get an extended take about how the Browns played the draft. But I really did like how they did this, picking up extra picks and then investing in this defensive line as opposed to going with like a Travis Hunter, where at wide receiver and corner, the Browns may or may not be relatively well off there. And obviously they technically could have just taken Abdul Carter as well, which it's a different conversation, but the picks are awesome. And to have an extra first round next year to potentially get involved for a quarterback, I think will not be regrettable. And especially when you still get a really good player like Mason Graham, that gives you a little bit more of an interior presence. But for a undersized defensive tackle, he is astonishingly good against the run. Again, relative to that size, he plays with great pad level and effort and really good pound for pound play strength. And then as a pass rusher, I do think he got underrated for his bull rush, where he did win with it. But man, this dude is so athletic for an interior player. The way he can set you up with kind of like Euro step cross-facing pass rush wins is really impressive. Michigan would even just have him stand up in a 2-point stance and work guards that way. And I think Myles Garrett being able to do a lot of that stuff too leads to some really interesting potential combinations, kind of moving these guys around and finding matchup problems, not to mention getting them involved on twists and stunts. Again, really just playing off of each other. So I'm really excited to see this duo. I think it's going to be a pretty special one, and not to slight Travis Hunter or anything, but basically that we can look back on this and say the Browns made a good call here with how they played the draft. And then they also signed Malik Collins as the other interior defensive lineman. He's a kind of a one-trick pony as a penetrating, pass-rushing 3 technique. Perfect for this system, though, that loves running ET and TE stunts, twists, and games up top, where Collins can either blow up a guard and have someone like Tryon Shoyinka, who does have good get off and bend, if anything, have that type of player kind of loop in behind him as someone like Collins blows up a pair of offensive linemen, the occupy guy on those stunts. But he's also athletic enough if you collapse, say, Myles Garrett or an Alex Wright off the edge, or even Isaiah McGuire at times, and blow up those 2 offensive linemen. Malik Collins can be the loop man. So he is perfect for the types of pass rush games that they like to call here. He can win one-on-one at times as well. So, 2 years, $20 million contract for Malik Collins to help the pass rush. Not a bad move. Unfortunately, he's going to be out there for a lot of run defense snaps, and that is where Collins really just doesn't have any discipline, and that lack of discipline has really been painful for Browns fans, with guys abandoning gaps, having these wide open run lanes for opposing running backs, and you've got the defensive tackle. Yeah, sweet, you shot into a gap, because the offensive line wanted you to go into that space because you can't make a play from there. There's a lot of that from Malik Collins, and that's where you're hoping they can find a healthy balance of rotating in Shelby Harris on early downs. And Shelby Harris can still play. He's becoming a bit of an ageless wonder at this point at 34 years old. He's not a dominant run defender. He is still technically undersized at 6'3", 300 pounds. So they don't really have any sort of two-gapping players in this entire defense. But Harris can maybe hold down a gap a little bit better than someone like Collins and maintain that discipline on early downs. And I wouldn't imagine we see too much Shelby Harris on pass rushing downs. At this stage, the pass rushing efficiency has certainly fallen off as his athleticism has fallen off, but still definitely a useful third defensive tackle that they're happy to have back. And then we got to keep an eye on Mike Hall Jr., who I was certainly a fan of coming out of the draft until very quickly into his pro career. He ends up facing a 5-game suspension over a pretty damning domestic violence situation that I can't defend him for it, right? And certainly became less of a fan of him after that. But as a player, he's got a ton of potential, and I really liked this as a draft pick when they made it. Very young prospect coming out, and he has bulked up. He played at Ohio State at about 280 pounds because they like a undersized kind of 3 technique in their defense, but going to the league, he puts on a little bit of weight, and I thought his run defense tape at 280 pounds was respectable at Ohio State. And he did some, is all in flashes, right? He only played 232 snaps in his rookie season, but he did have 8 run stops per PFF. I thought in this style defense, leaning into an athlete like him, like he did some good stuff in the run game, and then showed some of those flashes as a pass rusher as well. 16 pressures and a sack on 162 pass rush snaps. He's got a ton of athleticism. He's got a bull rush. Like, again, as a football prospect that gets drafted in the 2nd round, there's a ton of potential for him and Mason Graham and Myles Garrett to cause a lot of problems. I would say for more of a raw prospect coming out, there's no real football reason to believe that this was a bad pick or that he can't reach his upside, so that's a positive comment. But I also don't know just how much momentum there is for Mike Hall, given the domestic violence situation and questions about kind of his character and off the field. So very much up in the air with Mike Hall. They don't necessarily need him to emerge, but if he does, you are entering some pretty dangerous territory for how good this Browns pass rush could be. Like, if Mason Graham exceeds even my 75 overall ranking of him as a rookie, which he's very well capable of, and Mike Hall hits, like, and hell, maybe you even get a little bit of extended growth from still young Isaiah McGuire, this could absolutely be the best pass rush in the entire NFL. They're already not too far off of that. Then you got Sam Kamara, kind of an undersized try-hard on the D-line. And then Jawan Briggs, too, a 7th-round pick last year. Didn't get on the field until as late as week 13, but definitely was a contributor to the run defense shaping up a little bit as the year went on, and probably made himself a lock to make this team and even be a part of the rotation, getting maybe 10, 12 snaps, taking those away from Malik Collins on early downs as well. But yeah, this is a group to get excited about. We talked about the potential upside to even be the best pass rush in the NFL as early as this season. They are very light in terms of run defense, but they do try to scheme around it, and they have a couple of guys like Briggs and Hall and a young Mason Graham that could certainly make this group exceed the sort of C grade for D-line run defense that we give them as well. So, like, really just not anything negative to say about this group at all, other than long-term, you're probably still going to want a number 2 edge opposite of Myles Garrett, something a little closer to what they did have in Zadarius Smith. But nothing wrong with kind of giving Isaiah McGuire a year to see what he could turn into. You can't fix everything in one offseason. But let's move forward to the linebacker room. It's a pretty lowly ranking group right now with the young Carson Schlesinger slated to start here. It's not a horrible duo, but they do rank 27th for overall linebacker grade. Higher for coverage, 20th to 23rd. And then a good bit lower, 28th for the linebacker run defense grade. So you got Jordan Hicks is your LB1. He's a very stable starter, though he is quietly 33 years old. Hicks also has an extensive injury history that is worth noting. He hasn't played a full season in the last 3 years. And early in his career, he was getting banged up constantly. So, I don't think you're expecting him necessarily to miss games, but something to kind of stash in the back of your head as you think about this group. But he's got a great nose for the ball and run defense. By today's standards, he's got pretty good size, 6'1", 236. Relatively consistent tackler. Has his bad games, but kind of a career 10% missed tackle rate is pretty average by NFL starting standards. And then as a coverage defender, he's still pretty heady. Like, he's got the zone IQ. He has like really instinctive plays on tape, but you do definitely see an athlete at his age that, and this goes even back to when he was in Minnesota like 2 years ago, but trying to turn and run on a crossing route against a slot wide receiver or run up the seam, like, he's certainly not the fastest starter in the game today. So teams can get him in coverage. But yeah, he's a steady, good, aging veteran starter. This is much more going to revolve around what do they get from the young Carson Schlesinger out the gate. He was a very fun prospect. I think Schlesinger's upside is through the roof, really. I'm excited to see him play. But a one-year starter at UCLA who was a walk-on, but a really athletic walk-on. He's fast. He has some of the just smoothest movement skills you'll see from a linebacker, the way he can flip his hips and run. He's got quick feet to kind of navigate blocks around the line of scrimmage. Like, just a really special athlete that clearly slipped through the recruiting ranks with how well he can move. But he plays with that walk-on mentality. He flies to the football. And from a run defense perspective, it leads to some of the most polarizing run defense tape you'll ever see from a linebacker. Like, if you just made a highlight reel for Schlesinger, you would think this dude is going to be an elite run defender at the next level. You load up a full game of all 22, and it's very play-to-play because he runs at the first thing he sees. He overshoots gaps. He undershoots gaps, trying to make plays on the trail. He tries to dodge blocks at times when you need to see him take on blocks, and it can really hurt his defense at times. And Browns fans are hearing this like, oh God, here we go again. Another over-aggressive defender that's going to lead to all these gaping holes in our run defense. And there's absolutely a world where Carson Schlesinger actively hurts this team in a big way at times. But the good thing is he's still young. Again, just really a one-year starter at UCLA. He's got a lot to learn at this position, as any young linebacker does, but him especially. So taking better angles, playing with more discipline, there's plenty of room for him to grow in that department. On the flip side, the Browns haven't really valued that from this second linebacker. Like, JOK is basically allowed to do whatever he wants in this defense. And that's okay because he's JOK. But can they just ask Carson Schlesinger to replace him and just fly around and use his instincts 24/7 like JOK does? We'll see. We'll see how that all works out. But that's just the run defense angle. The one real big positive on Schlesinger is, even though he's kind of in all these awkward positions because of his over-aggressiveness, he still managed to be a pretty damn consistent tackler at UCLA. So that's definitely impressive and worth noting. But, you know, that all doesn't sound amazing with Schlesinger. Honestly, what gets you really fired up about him is he has some of the best coverage tape you'll see from a college linebacker. So few of these college linebackers are actually asked to drop into pro-style hook zones and read the quarterback's eyes and navigate their way into passing lanes consistently. And he did, and he showed for a one-year starter exceptional zone IQ paired with his athletic ability. He has ridiculous upside in pass coverage. The pro comp I wrote down on a high end, I retroactively realized is another UCLA linebacker, but Eric Kendricks, who was arguably the best coverage linebacker, or at least a top 3 to 5 coverage linebacker in the league for a half a decade. That's the type of upside you have with him. There's even like little shades of a young Fred Warner in there with the way he can move. So I like the pick, especially in a terrible linebacker class. And it's just, this has become the theme, is there's just not a lot of good young linebackers coming out of college. A lot to like with him, but there's probably going to be some volatility with him and some rookie learning moments with him that could potentially lead to some losses for this team, because he's going to vacate his gap in run defense, and for an already aggressive front, we've seen this, right? So there's Schlesinger. As far as depth goes, like, they got some names. They got Devin Bush, who actually came in and played some of his best ball for this team last year. With JOK going down, Devin Bush was able to step right into that kind of undersized, aggressive role. I don't think you want, like, if anything happens to Hicks, I don't think you want Bush and Schlesinger out there. Maybe they could make do, but still not bad for a backup. Obviously, worst case scenario, something happens to Carson Schlesinger, you still have that kind of athletic guy next to Jordan Hicks. Like we said, Hicks isn't the fastest guy at this stage in his career, so it's nice to have some speed next to him. And if they do ever want to get into base 4-3 fronts, which they do still do, Bush is a very good weak side third linebacker to have. So good depth in that sense. And then you have Jerome Baker, who is, again, more of a Carson Schlesinger backup than a Jordan Hicks backup, because he's a coverage really only linebacker. His run defense tape is just not the type of tape you want to show a young linebacker. Missing tackles, dodging blocks. He's undersized, but he can still move and cover well. He keeps getting jobs for that reason. Then you got Mohamed Diabate, who's shown some flashes. He just might be the Jordan Hicks backup as more of a fuller-sized run defender. He actually showed some pretty impressive flashes, and he played 580 snaps for this team last year. Obviously getting pushed down the depth chart a little bit, but again, I wouldn't be surprised if he is their kind of middle linebacker Jordan Hicks backup in more of that role. Still young, 24 years old, so we'll keep an eye on him. He's not a bad backup to have by any stretch of the imagination. Had some ugly moments at the end of last season. He missed 10 tackles in the last 3 games of the season, and probably why we're seeing him a little bit lower in the depth chart right now. But then you got Winston Reed, Nathaniel Watson, probably competing for a roster spot, have to do that through special teams. And we can at least mention Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, obviously a top 10 linebacker with a ton of playmaking feel, one of the best blitzing linebackers in the game, but entered the NFL with medical red flags and sadly just hasn't been able to stay on the field for Cleveland. Suffered a really hard to watch neck injury last season, and there's a growing belief that this is the last we've seen of Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, and frankly, shout out the viewer in our draft stream that had a connection to close to JOK that believes he's going to retire and be an anthropologist in Africa. That was an interesting standout moment in our draft stream. Shout out to that viewer. I'm sorry, I don't know the name of who that was, but between that and the Browns obviously putting JOK on the IR and Schlesinger being that top pick in the second round, there's a lot of smoke there that we just might never see him again. But that rounds out your linebacker room. Again, a serviceable C-graded 27th ranked linebacker room here. I do think the coverage side of things will be okay with what we've seen from Schlesinger there. Again, they ranked 20th to 23rd there. But 28th for the linebacker run defense. It just is going to come down to what Carson Schlesinger can bring as a rookie. And I do think there's a lot of potential for some pretty low lows with this group overall in terms of run defense, especially if Jordan Hicks is getting banged up. But there's upside here as well, which is obviously a growing theme with this young Browns team, that they could actually shatter this 27th linebacker ranking if Schlesinger surprises us, but it's hard for these young linebackers to hit the ground running. It's usually a 2 or 3 year developmental process for these guys on average. But let's go to the secondary to round out this defensive roster. Talented group that hasn't really reached their upside, especially with this cornerback room. Man, heading into last season, I felt like this had potential to emerge as the best cornerback trio in the NFL, and it really went in the opposite direction. Not so much with Denzel Ward, but with Greg Newsome and Martin Emerson. And now we really head into 2025 with some pretty major questions with those two players, both in contract years. It doesn't stop me from believing in this secondary, I'll be honest. I still love Denzel Ward. He's one of the underrated corners in the entire NFL. And I do still believe in these two young corners behind him, just as the Browns do. They did not replace these guys. I have them ranking kind of in the middle of the league there with a B grade for their coverage grade as a whole, ranking 13th to 15th for DB coverage. But that's a volatile ranking. It could end up in the top 10, and it could end up into the 20s if Greg Newsome and Martin Emerson can't get their shit together. We'll come back to them in just a second, but I do want to highlight Denzel Ward just for a moment. He actually had one of the better years of his career last year for Cleveland. He ends up with 17 pass breakups, 2 interceptions, a reception percentage of 53%, which is very good. If you're under 60, that's pretty good. If you're closing in on 50, that is exceptional. So just like a very high-end season from an already high-end corner. And in Ward's case, they ask a lot of him. They put him on an island, they play cover one, and ask him to, dominate number one wide receivers. And he does a very good job of doing that. So I don't know that he's top 5, but top 8 feels pretty safe on Denzel Ward. And that's obviously a big reason why I still have a lot of faith in the Browns, ranking inside the top half of the league for the DB coverage grade. But when it comes to these other two guys, the talent's there. It's just a matter of consistency. And, Greg Newsome, who plays mostly as their slot corner, I don't think he's been comfortable as their slot, but they don't really have another option because Martin Emerson kind of needs to be outside, and kind of so does Denzel Ward. So they've asked Newsome to be their primary slot corner, and I think that's part of why there's been a lot of kind of trade discussions with Greg Newsome, is they're kind of backed into a corner where they don't have a great place to play him right now. But I do think it's hurt him, and I think, honestly, how bad he's been as a run defender from the slot, because he's a slender outside corner that frankly has, at least coming out of college, like he's at his best as like an off zone, quick twitch out in space corner. Having him run all this kind of bump and run, tight physical coverage from the slot, having to come up, fill the run, tackle. I think he's lost a lot of confidence, which is extremely underrated for this position. You've got to have a short memory. You've got to have the confidence that if you screw up, you can come back and make a play the next snap. And I think Greg Newsome has lost a lot of that. And the last 2 years, again, playing a lot from the slot, he misses 18% of his tackles in 2023, 24% in 2024. That's just brutal. I mean, just place yourself in Greg Newsome's position. 1 out of 4 times that you're trying to tackle an offensive player, you're missing that tackle. And I do think that has really gotten into his head, and he's starting to play slower and just more poorly overall. There's still some really good snaps, some individual good performances in terms of total games from him. I still see the unbelievable athletic movement skills that made him a first-round pick. I think he can find the ball and make plays and do all of that without being overly grabby. It's just, he to me does feel like a change of scenery is necessary, whether that's a trade or just put him back on the outside where I think he's better. And if that means Martin Emerson needs to take a seat and you got to play Nick Needham in the slot or whatever, Devontae KZ in the slot, so be it. But I don't see that as the direction they want to go. I think they want to keep going with these guys. And I don't know, maybe there's some stories I'm missing that Greg Newsome is bulking up and improving his tackling. And great. If he can, that's awesome, because he has the twitch to stay in front of, players as a tackler. But he does he's thin, and guys just run right through him. So And the technique needs to improve as well, dipping his head and all that. So I don't know. I don't know which direction this could go. I think his upside is that of a really nice perimeter starter on the outside as at worst a good number 2. But unfortunately, we've seen more of the downside than the upside as of late. And then you got Martin Emerson, former 3rd-round pick, and he's a good example of A, how volatile the cornerback position is, and B, how progression is not linear in the NFL. Just because a guy comes in as a rookie and, kind of is one of the better young corners in the NFL after his rookie season where he was outstanding, it doesn't necessarily mean he's only going to get better from there, because 2023, he was just kind of average. And last year, he was bench worthy for this Browns defense. Ends up disrupting just 2 passes compared to the 9 pass breakups he had in 2022. And even in 2023, had 13 passes defended, but just 2 last year, despite getting targeted 83 times. And the kicker here, he allows 6 touchdowns on 63% receptions allowed. It was really bad. He cannot play at the level he played last season. Otherwise, he will be getting benched here. They will be going to either Cam Mitchell or, like I suggested, put Greg Newsome back outside and play Nick Needham in the slot, who's been adequate in that role for the Miami Dolphins. I hate for it to come at the cost of Martin Emerson, but if it means Greg Newsome can settle back in and play well as an outside corner and not have to worry so much about the physical run defense demands of playing in the slot, I kind of am quietly hoping for that. But at the same time, I would love for Martin Emerson to get his mojo back and play at the level he did as a rookie. But that kind of feels unlikely at this point. It's a huge year nonetheless. We've seen good play from him. We've seen bad play from him. Contract year for him. We'll see. But as far as the depth is concerned, you have Cameron Mitchell, who was very much to me a poor man's Greg Newsome coming out. Better in an off-zone cover 4 system, which is not what they run here. And because of that, I think we've seen him struggle with bump and run and the style of defense that they play here. But a talented kind of potential long-term backup, I think. We've alluded to Nick Needham here, but he is a physical, experienced slot corner option for this team. Really not anything to write home about as a coverage defender, but someone that's actually willing to fill the run. And as I've said, I'm not entirely sure that this defense isn't better off with Needham out there as their slot corner and Newsome on the perimeter, with Martin Emerson as more of a dime corner. They at least have that flexibility if they decide to go that route. And then you got Tony Brown, a special teamer, and Miles Harden, another slot corner developing. He's played in and out, but I think long-term, probably a developmental slot corner option for them. They drafted him last season in the 7th round. But then you got the safety group. It's an adequate safety combo. I like Grant Delpit. Really athletic, lengthy safety who's done a really commendable job of cleaning up his tackling. That was kind of the big thing coming out of LSU, was he was over aggressive and had poor technique as a tackler that led to a lot of whiffs. And we saw that really on and off for the first 3 years of his career. Settled in much better this year. Got that missed tackle rate under 10%, which is very good for a safety. So I think that's a really great first step. He has received a contract extension here. He's still only 26 years old. There's a world where he continues to get even better, but I like where he's at right now as well. He's a pretty good coverage defender. They ask a lot of him to man up tight ends, to cover slot corners at times, to rotate high, to rotate down. It's kind of like the old Derwin James role where they asked too much of him and there was kind of too much on his plate at times. He wears a lot of hats and is a little bit streaky in doing so, but he's a good overall safety. No issues with it. And then you got Ronnie Hickman, who they mostly just stick deep and say stay deeper than the deepest, come up and tackle consistently. If you see a route break underneath you and you want to take a risk, go take a risk. Not the rangiest, most athletic coverage safety on the back end. Not someone that you want manning up a ton of slot players. But he's a smart zone defender that does his job. kind of the definition of a safety's safety, and they play him as such. So he's a nice player in the back end. I did put the up arrow on him just because he's played really nice coming in as an undrafted free agent. And I think just continuing to prove his worth, you're going to see his kind of rating climb up more and more. I think his upside's a little bit limited. He's kind of like a Jordan Fuller, another former Ohio State safety that, climbed up but then stalled out because he just doesn't have a lot of physical traits. But he's totally fine as a starter on the back end. And at this point, even for an undrafted player, I feel all right with him back there. And then they made very rational veteran signings to back those two guys up. Grant Delpit's kind of their move safety that spends a lot of time in the box. Therefore, they signed Rayshawn Jenkins, another 6'3", 210-pound safety that can play that role. And then DeMonte Casey is a little bit more versatile, but he would, to me, be more of the free safety, I would think, if anything were to happen to Hickman. Casey also has some slot flexibility, and he could also be an option if they want to do what I've suggested and play someone else in the slot and kick Newsome outside. So he's a very nice, flexible veteran signing that's getting up there in age, but can still be an adequate backup there. And that rounds out your secondary. So again, 13th to 15th for DB coverage. Very volatile. It's not a ranking I feel super great about, but I do also believe that there is upside for them to go higher than that. But certainly some downside to be more of a bottom half of the league secondary, at least. Just a huge year for both Newsome and Emerson. And then they are still pretty lowly ranking for DB run support. I think they've done an okay job cleaning up some of their issues. I mean, having Newsome in the slot, it's just they can't go much higher than a C, really. But Hickman's been a steady tackler on the back end, and Grant Delpit, cleaning up some of his missed tackle issues, have at least improved this part of their defense a little bit. Whereas in 2023, their inability to tackle from the back end was catastrophic. Didn't quite feel those issues last season, outside of Craig Newsome. But yeah, let's round out this entire defense. So it's a pretty split unit. They come in for me as the 7th ranked pass defense, being someone that values pass rush quite a lot. Being top 5 in pass rush is going to help you get up there on the charts. But yeah, theoretically solid to good secondary. The linebacker coverage side of things should still be pretty nice with Schlesinger, having pretty good college tape in coverage. And then I do think the way that they scheme up the pass rush and Jim Schwartz as a defensive coach, I still like. So a B+ grade, 7th ranking pass defense, obviously the highest ranking aspect of a unit that we've discussed in this deep dive so far. But 30th in run defense, the thinner or at least lighter defensive line. Obvious questions with the linebackers in run defense, especially with Schlesinger. And then the secondary not giving you too much elevation in terms of run support either. And I think we've kind of raised some coaching questions in that phase too, where they do rank much lower for run defense coaching, 28th to 29th in the league with kind of what we've seen. Some of the gaffes with that run defense over the last 2 years under Jim Schwartz. But they do come in as the 21st overall defense, a B- grade overall. Still should be a unit that gives us some good games, some dominant games even. Probably, maybe some matchup dependent weeks, some more volatile weeks with their play style. But a lot of youth and excitement as well for this to get back on track, because the first 12 weeks of that 2023 Browns defense was one of those defenses that warranted getting a nickname, if you know what I'm saying. And it has very quickly fallen away from that. But let's talk a little special teams before we start to tie a ribbon on all of this. The Browns came out by my formula ranking quite poorly for special teams. And depending who you asked last season, that's not a surprise, because PFF's team grade on them was 4th overall, but DVOA had them 30th for team grade on special teams. My total formula spit them out as the 30th ranked special teams. Now, that is almost exclusively, number one, because of the DVOA grade, that again was very low for them. But their kicker, Dustin Hopkins, was horrid last season. He missed 9 field goals last season and 3 extra points. And it's not like Dustin Hopkins is some like career awesome kicker. The main reason I feel like they're keeping him is because 2023 he was much better. But yeah, he's the lowest graded kicker in this entire series at 35 years old. That drags this thing down a good bit. They are 5th with the punter. Corey Bajorquez is a fantastic punter. They're just fine with the returner. They brought in DeAndre Carter, who will do his job. He's fine. He's, typical career return type. And then they do get dragged down a little bit too because of their overall team coach and culture grade that we give to all of these teams. So the benefit of the doubt slider is lower on the Browns. If they can replace the kicker, or if Dustin Hopkins can be closer to 2023 Dustin Hopkins, they should be just fine, if not good, on special teams. But the fact that we do calculate in the last 2 seasons of kicker grades for this, and he still came out 32nd, it speaks to how bad Dustin Hopkins was last season. I think Browns fans will relate to that as well. But not the best projection for the Browns special teams, but it is very difficult to estimate special teams. It is volatile for all of these teams. That's why special teams only gets 1% of the final calculation. Had a couple requests to put the formula in the description below, so you will see the total team formulas in the description down below now. But wrapping things up on the Browns, again, 30th on offense, 21st on defense, 30th on special teams. They come in 30th in these power rankings. Really just a team in transition, trying to, kind of bridge their way into a new era of Browns football post Deshaun Watson. But to kind of recap their strengths, weaknesses, and pivotal factors, they do have one defining strength, and that is the pass rush, which is a damn good strength to have. If you want to talk about this team surprising this season, I would argue that, having one of the best pass rushes in the NFL is a good path to doing that. But they do have some pretty defining weaknesses. Quarterback, of course, right now looking like a pretty major weakness for this team. No surprise there. But the depth at wide receiver is pretty concerning. Not just in terms of like if somebody got hurt, like who's going to step in, but even just putting 3 wide receivers out there, they're going to have some pretty suspect options, especially if Deontay Johnson can't get his head right. But then the run defense is a weakness for me, as we just detailed. But some pretty critical wild card factors for them. The offensive line could go in a lot of different directions here, as we've seen the last couple of years. Like 3 core older players there, Bitonio, Teller, and Conklin. Can they settle in and have nice years at their age, or is this going to go in the opposite direction and this offensive line really continues to struggle and hurt this offense's ability to figure things out? That's a huge variable for this offense beyond just all the young players. Not to mention the volatility with DeJuan Jones at left tackle there. And then the secondary as well, extremely volatile with what we talked about with those 2 younger corners in the contract year with Emerson and Greg Newsome. I feel like we've said this 3 times now, but they're going to determine basically if they're a top 10 secondary or the 24th secondary in the league. And then kicker that we just talked about. Can Dustin Hopkins get back to 2023 form? If not, the special teams will be a real problem for them. But let's take a look at the Browns' schedule, their Vegas over-under, and kind of their win projection for this 2025 season. Vegas has their over-under at 4.5 wins. They are tied for 30th in Super Bowl odds, so we are right in line with how Vegas sees them in terms of those power rankings. A whopping 30-1 division odds. They do not expect the Browns to be in contention with teams like the Ravens and the Bengals for this division. And looking at this schedule, honestly, I get it. Like, this is really concerning. The start of their schedule screams 0-5 to me, barring an upset. You got the Bengals, the Ravens, the Packers, the Lions, and the Vikings are your first 5 games. One of those is in London. The Ravens and Lions on the road. Like, for a team whose coach is on the hot seat and a culture that has spiraled out of control seemingly year and year again, what is an 0-5 start going to do for all of that? Like, that's almost unfair to the Cleveland Browns to get that start when they're trying to get some things going here. Things settle down a little bit, but it's still a tough schedule. I only have them favorited in that one home game against Tennessee, but really their saving grace is going to be week 6, 7, 8. You've got Pittsburgh, Miami, and New England, the bye week, week 9, and then you have the Jets week 10, and then Raiders week 12. Like, you kind of got to ask this Browns team to go 4-2 in that stretch in the middle of the season there, if you have any chance of hitting over on this, because things pick back up at the end with the Niners, the Bills, at Chicago, Pittsburgh, Cincinnati. Like, it's a tough go at it for this Browns team. So my math had them coming out at 4.9 projected wins, and frankly, I don't think it's a bad under team this season. Looking at the schedule, before I saw the schedule, I was pretty optimistic that this team was going to, end up higher than the 30th team in my power rankings and, build some stuff together and finish with maybe a sneaky 7 or 8 win season kind of in my gut. But schedule's definitely leading against that. But hopefully they can still overcome it and make it happen. I like the direction of this football team. I do. They got a lot of work to do. They've got a whole ass quarterback room to figure out. Like, obviously, a long way to go for this Browns team, but I like the offseason and a lot of the young players that you can hopefully get excited about with this team. So there is your Browns deep dive. Let me know in the comments down below if you think I missed anything. Who do you think comes in at the 29 spot in these deep dives? Ultimately, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you hit that like button already if you did, but if you haven't, please take a second to do that. It really helps me out. And make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any of these deep dives heading your way soon. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you for the next one. Peace out.